Okay, so we are doing really well for time. Just a quick reminder that after the next speaker, we're going to take a short break. Coffee will be served outside, and we will resume as close to 11 as possible. Our next speaker is Frances Spalding, art historian, critic, biographer, specializing in 20th century British art. She has written on artists Vanessa Bell, Duncan Grant, John Minton, and Whistler, among many others. In this country, Frances Spalding is perhaps best known for her publication British Art Since 1900, published by Thames and Hudson in their World of Art series. She also published the book Prunella Clough, Regions Unmapped, about the work of Eileen Gray's niece. Today, we are privileged to have an overview of new work she is pursuing, and I hope that that new work will actually be given a venue in an exhibition that Jennifer is planning at the National Museum of Ireland in 2 years on Eileen Gray as artist. But today, Frances will be talking on the mysterious uncertainty Eileen Gray's works on paper.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Nina, for your introduction. Thank you very much indeed for this invitation to be here today. And Chloe, thank you also for your sharing of information with me on Eileen Gray's works on papers. Thank you, Jennifer, also for your help on Visit to Ireland and for your magnificent book and so on. Gray used the phrase mysterious uncertainty in a letter to Stephen Hoyce to describe a mood or feeling that she enjoyed. It is also, just getting me, which one, can I move it upside down? Okay. And I want to sort of suggest also that the mysterious uncertainty clings in some way to this photograph of Gray. We have no definite date for this image, or for the others that were taken at the same sitting, given to G.C. Beresford, a London-based society photographer. Peter Adam offered us circa 1910, and Jennifer Goff offers us 1916 to 18. I want to add to the uncertainty surrounding this photograph by suggesting it just might be circa 1905, the year that Gray returned to London from Paris and turned 27. The date 1916 to 18 is nevertheless possible. Interestingly, Gray's brother-in-law, Eric Clough Taylor, Prunella Clough's father, Prunella Clough dropped the double barrel name and left off Taylor. He was photographed in his army uniform by Beresford in 1917, resulting in a photograph that Gray kept with her all her life. But if Goff's later date is correct, then Gray here is somewhere between 38 and 40. So I leave it to you to decide which dating is right. But another reason why I've begun with this photograph is that it makes such a striking contrast with the ones that Bernice Abbott took in 1926, and which, of course, Gray commissioned. It's such a striking contrast, and I think it just speaks volumes about the enormous courage that Gray had in fashioning for herself success in a foreign country. As a designer, by this time with her own shop, one of the first women in Paris to obtain the equivalent to a driver's license, had also piloted a plane. She was moving in avant-garde circles in a city where the art world was booming. Surrealism, of course, had just replaced Dada and Josephine Baker, symbolizing the beauty and vitality of African culture, had taken Paris by storm. Gray had also discovered her bisexuality through an affair with the singer Damia, and began another with the architect Jean Badovici, whose advice to build had started her work on E1027. Her earlier Byronic style has vanished, and she has become, in the lingo of the day, a new woman. Such shape-shifting is also an aspect of her works on paper, and uncertainty as to their dating, as with the early photograph, remains a key problem. Until the recent Charlotte Perriand show at the Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, Eileen Gray occupied a solitary position within the canon of architectural history. The spare elegance that shaped this house is the product of its inherent logic. Its aesthetic identifies Gray as a modernist architect immediately, and yet she simultaneously criticised some of the avant-garde criteria for modern housing. As we've heard, she wanted to give more attention to the function of a room and how this relates to the room space and to the modern individual's need for balance, harmony, and self-recovery. Perriand, who collaborated on certain projects with Corbusier, was more brazen and mischievous in her response to modernist constrictions. But like Gray, she too adopted the machine age aesthetic, yet questioned its totalitarian strictness. When Caroline Constant labelled Gray's modernism non-heroic in 1994, she implied a rejection of modernism's more masculine or militaristic aspects. And in recent years, changing concepts of gender and sexuality have been used by Jasmine Rowe to explore further the precise nature of Gray's achievement. Yet, Gray's objection to Le Corbusier's 1923 announcement that a house is a machine for living in remains absolutely vital. She says, a house is not a machine to live in. It is the shell of man. She's using the word man in the old-fashioned way to imply humankind generally. It is the shell of man, his extension, his release, his spiritual emanation. Not only its visual harmony, but its entire organisation, all the terms of the work combine to render it human in the most profound sense. Well, the slow but growing attention to Gray's art, and you can see this work in the exhibition. It's a magnificent piece, not quite this size, but tremendously powerful, nevertheless. Suggests that these works on paper are not peripheral or even a parallel activity to her other creative ventures. Increasingly, they come to be seen to be a significant thread woven throughout her entire career. And the story of her works on paper have, of course, suffered, as did everything else from that long period of neglect that followed the attention given to E1027, the first complete house, which, as we know, she left in 1932. Now, there are numerous causes for that neglect, but one was Gray's difficulty in completing projects, and the other, of course, was the onset of the Second World War. She refused to leave France during the war, but being an enemy alien, she was obliged at very short notice to leave her second house at Castellar on the hills behind Menton, owing to its closeness to the sea. This combined with the fact that the house was later occupied not by Nazis, as we were originally told, but by American soldiers, and which was left stripped and looted by the end of the war. And in 1944, she lost her small apartment at Saint-Tropez, which was destroyed when the Nazis blew up the port. Almost certainly, this means that her works on paper, many of her works on paper, were very probably destroyed. So there is no firm developmental trajectory that has yet emerged. The dating of her pictures in catalogues and books is often haphazard or unsubstantiated and sometimes inconsistent. And generally there is a lack of evidence as to when, where, or why many of them were produced. And therefore the record of this work is at the moment fragmented and incomplete. The revival of interest in her and her work began, as you know, in the late 1990s. So there's just another work on paper. And I suggest that it has a similar feel to it, the work we've just seen. What it lacks is that sense of buried narrative, possibly a reference to weakness or something that the former one had, and this is purely abstract. So then you're in an indecisive thing as to whether to put it with the one we've just been looking at, or to give it a date much later, probably in the 50s or somewhere, but it's quite a problem. So what happened in the late 1960s is that, according to Jennifer, Joseph Rickwert, the architectural historian, approached Gray's niece, Prunella Clough, with a request to write an article, although everything else about your description of Rickworth is wonderful and sound. That, I think, is incorrect, because according to Rickworth, there was a different story. Clough had enjoyed a long-standing friendship with Rickworth, and the death of her mother in 1966 left her able to give more attention to her ageing aunt, now badly in need of organisational help. Her aunt, of course, living in Paris. Clough asked Rickworth if he knew of her aunt's work. Rickworth, assuming he was going to hear the name of a minor watercolour painter, politely asked what the name of this aunt, and Clough replied, Eileen Gray. With astonishment, Rickworth said, of course I know her work, but she's been dead for years. Not true, Clough explained. Eileen Gray was very much alive and living in Paris. Would Rickworth write an article on her? Well, Rickworth's article, which appeared in the Italian design magazine Domus, began with the start of this revival. He went on to write other articles and so on. And in time, as we know, it brought about exhibitions in Dublin, Paris, Los Angeles and Vienna. The first of these significant or major shows was held in 1972 to 73 at Rebus, that's the Royal Institute of British Architects, Heinz Gallery in London. This was also, as far as I know, the first exhibition in which Gray allowed works on paper to be shown as art objects in their own right. In England, the first person to take a serious interest in Gray, sorry, I've forgotten to give you an image of Prunella Clough, was Monica Kinley, a London gallerist and also friend of Clough, you see here, and she mounted an Eileen Gray exhibition in 1975, during which several works on paper were for the first time sold, as far as I'm aware, to private collectors. Prunella Clough began recording a list of these works. She also did much to put her aunt's archive in working order, and began making lists of rug and carpet designs, as well as works on paper. She also helped Gray attract new outlets for her work by licensing designs to certain furniture shops for modern copies of the originals. You can find Prunella Clough's handwriting on the far right-hand corner of this drawing, where the words read, lines should all be the same width. It's a small but telling detail as to the kind of care that Prunella Clough invested in Gray's work as her archivist and promoter. And meanwhile, Kinley did much to sell Gray's rugs, sold 2 works on paper also in the 1970s to public art galleries, one to Leicester Museum and Art Gallery, now the New Walk Museum, and another in 1977 to the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. This is the Collage in Leicester, I'm afraid again slightly larger than its actual size. It is unlike any other work on paper I have seen, which may confirm my earlier suggestion that much of her work, of her art on paper, has been destroyed. It has a strong design and an architectural feel to it. It carries, I think, allusions, possibly to a plan of a house or of a garden. The date given this work, presumably originating with Kinley, who knew Gray, and possibly based on conversations with her, is 1940 to 49. Again, something of a capacious guess. But in 1941, at a time when Clough was developing theories about meditation, she designed a meditation grove or garden for a hypothetical site outside Saint-Tropez. It was never built, but it may have had a relationship with this collage. Incidentally, when Clough included this work in her lists and mentioned its sale to Leicester Museum and Art Gallery, she identified the medium as card, ink and gouache. The museum, as I show in my caption, identifies oil paint. One is wrong, and I think it is the museum. But notice how the pale orange circle plays a critical role, bringing this section forward on the left-hand side and suddenly making it ambiguous as to which layer is on top of another. If you cover that little orange dot up with your hand, the work of art immediately loses a lot of tension and energy. The second picture that Kinley sold to a public art gallery, this time in 1977, is again a collage, and I think again benefits in its dating from association with Kinley or Clough and possibly conversations with Gray, who had died the year before. It suggests that it was from the date suggested is that it's 1940 to 42, therefore possibly made just before Clough had to leave, Gray had to leave her house at Castellar. The mood of this small collage seems to me to insist on a Dadaist sense of the absurd. As you can see, a painter or an architect clutching his portfolio stands marooned on an island with a caged bird at his feet. On the far side of some dark water is more land and rocks and a sign showing a bent arrow, suggesting that the right direction, which may be difficult to reach, requires a U-turn. Meanwhile, an untethered balloon, possibly a symbol of hope, rises, trailing behind it, an exuberantly patterned tail. Gray, as mentioned, was forced to leave Castellar given a day's notice, and in order to be near two friends, she moved with her maid Louise Dany to Lourmain, north of Aix. There was little she could do while there, and Peter Adam notes that while there she painted a great deal, but what exactly she painted is hard to say. In the revised edition of his biography of Gray, he included a reproduction of this work, also in the exhibition, in which the caption he gives to it in the book is the Second World War. But as in a later book on which he has also had some involvement, a book on her collages and works on paper, he allowed the person in charge of the captions to revert to circa 1930s, which is the date given in the current show. So again, we need to look and think very carefully about when a work like this might have come from. Here I think the forms create a dreamlike or surreal landscape. The white triangle at the back inevitably suggests a distant mountain. It is an elegant composition, playing on the viewer's awareness of perspective to create this semi-abstract landscape, based around contrasts of smooth form and sharp outlines, and rather similar in mood to the kind of anonymous landscapes that Salvador Dali used for settings in his work. Gray owns several books on surrealism, as well as a copy of a first edition of Breton's Surrealist Manifesto, published in 1924, and we know that she got to know Breton and Aragon through a commission she received from Jacques Doucet. In this and other ways, she would almost certainly, by 1926, have become familiar with the surrealist gift for unexpected juxtapositions, which jar the mind and set it dreaming. Now, when Picasso introduced papier collé into synthetic cubism by picking up a bit of rubbish off his studio floor, perhaps a packet that had formerly contained cigarette papers from among the detritus at his feet, he was, in effect, introducing a piece of rubbish into the world of high art. And it was an act that was aesthetically and politically radical, and it encouraged a return to the use of collage. At the same time, it had a collage which is a broader form of picture making than just papier collé, but it's something that has existed for many years previously and was mostly regarded as a kind of domestic pastime. Okay. However, once collage takes on a form of becomes a tool in the artist's what's available to the artists, it somehow loses its radicalism. And I think, it's sometimes very difficult to date collages precisely because they can belong to so many periods. I'm going to rattle through a few slides now. This is a work found in the Victorian Albert Museum's archives. It's based on a plan of one of the rooms at E1027, and you can see that the abstract shapes are directly related to the colours that were thought to should be used for that room: the brilliant blue, the muddy brown, and the pale but fervent yellow, as shown here. So collage was also here a different, more constructive tool than in other works. And here you see the colours that work in here. Here's a collage which I think is very difficult to take. It could potentially come from the 1930s or be post-Second World War. In the subtitle of a recent exhibition and book called The Private Painter, which Osborne Samuel showed in London, reminds us that Gray appears to have kept her art hidden from the public eye for many years. This is in line with Caroline Constant's observation, I quote her, that Gray's sense of propriety and natural shyness led her to carry out her personal life with extreme discretion. But her art increased in importance as an outlet for her creativity, diminished with the onset of Parkinson's disease and old age. And having spent many of her years of her life working a 14-hour day, the habit of work was ingrained. Writing to the artist and writer Stephen House, with whom she sustained this long epistolary relationship, she admitted in 1962, her 84th year, I too have an urge to work and have hatched out some monotypes. Her willingness to exhibit and sell such work during the last years of her life establishes its significance in her career. Now, because of time, I'm going to shoot through things that we've seen before, like these rug designs, though I do think she didn't differentiate between a design that was for something else, like a design for a rug, and from her other works on paper. I think they have the same beauty and attention that you see here. Links with her card for the shop. Again, we've heard about her fondness and admiration for Malevich, and echoes of him can be seen in various forms. We've already seen this design. Map, a lot of her collages have to do with self-refer to her own work elsewhere and so on. As Jennifer very cleverly identified this particular collage with a view of looking at the site where E1027 sits on the hillside at Broome. And finally, I just want to mention the association between these Brunella Clough's work. This is one of a series of paintings that Brunella did based on the theme of a gate. You'll see at the top here. Oh, sorry, I lost it. Lost it. Well, oh, sorry, I've gone back. Well, anyway, I just think the T-square, you could at least see that, perhaps makes this painting a homage to her aunt, who she greatly admired and enjoyed. And there's something echoing in sensibility and flair between this interior at Tempapaya and the painting we've just seen. Brunella Clough herself would often use things very basic, like griddles or grids, to use her paintings, and an echo of that can be found in several of Eileen Gray's works. There's a painting in the collection and in the exhibition, as you see here, signed Prunella. It's not in Prunella's hand, it's in Eileen Gray's hand, and it's often suggested, personally by Peter Adam, that it is a joint work. And I don't know where he got that from. If he got it from Eileen, I should not in any way question it, but I do slightly question it. I've always somehow felt that this Gray added that word Prunella just to distinguish it from her own works. There was a tremendous affection between niece and aunt, and I just want to end with a quotation that she, being a very philosophical woman, she liked to give. After they went to art exhibitions in Paris together, looked at the work of artists like Anthony Tapies and many other abstract artists of that period. Gray wrote, I can understand the want to get free from conventional construction and the equilibrium one has wanted up to now, and I can see that Tapies means when he says it's unnecessary that painting should express anything at all, but just be. So she was very much in keeping with the mood of the time. Her own art had by now left behind, I think, its association with design purposes and had become autonomous. It perhaps bolstered her desire for aloofness from everyday matters, for in old age she was much plagued in her later years by disputes among the residents at 21 Rue de Bonaparte. greetings, discussions, and endless business letters, and yet she continued to work in what part of the day she could salvage, and she remained always philosophical. In an echo of her protest to Le Corbusier, she insisted, "Formulas are nothing. Life is everything, and life is simultaneously mind and heart." And one other of her aphorisms is this: "The future projects light, the past only shadows." Yet looking back on her own past in a letter to Stephen House, she regretted the destructiveness of modern life. Not only to animals and birds, but also, I quote her, to everything that gave grace to life, that spoke a certain language, things handmade, that mysterious uncertainty that was so fascinating, is a quality I think found in abundance in her art. Thank you.